The terminal buzzed with early morning chatter. Families in line, tired business travelers clutching coffee, a crying baby somewhere behind gate 14. Eli Ross moved slowly beside his daughter, Avery, his limp more pronounced after the 2-hour drive. He clutched the handle of his duffel bag with his left hand. The right, still stiff from a shrapnel injury, rested on his hip as if holding invisible weight. "Dad, do you want me to ask for the wheelchair?" Avery asked, already scanning the nearby counter. Eli shook his head at first, then winced. "Yeah, maybe just this time." Avery nodded and approached the gate agent. When she returned with a folded chair, one of the two nearby transportation officers chuckled. They were both young, early 30s at most, one broad and smirking, the other scrolling through his phone. The smirk deepened as he looked over. "Need a ride, soldier?" he called out. "Or just milking that limp for boarding perks?" Avery froze. Eli, slower to react, let out a breath. Not because he didn't care, because this wasn't new. Not anymore. He took a seat in the chair quietly, eyes forward. The second officer laughed, glancing up. "Bet he got that limp from slipping in the shower, not combat." Avery turned. "Excuse me." The smirker raised an eyebrow. "Just saying. Not all these vets are heroes. Some just play the part." For a moment, Avery said nothing. The terminal blurred around her, faces moving, announcements echoing, but her vision locked on those two. She felt her father's hand lightly tap hers, a silent plea. "Don't." But memories pushed through. The night Eli had collapsed during a fireworks show. The way he still checked doors twice before bed. How he stood at every national anthem, even in pain. How he screamed in his sleep. And how, this morning, he'd shaved carefully, pressed the one good blazer he owned, and packed his best shoes to honor a fallen friend. "Sir," Avery finally said, measured, voice trembling, "you have no idea who he is." The second officer shrugged. "Doesn't matter. People fake all kinds of things." She wanted to scream, but Eli tightened his grip on the armrest. "Avery, let it go." She looked at him, his face unreadable, jaw set. But she knew what he was feeling. Shame that wasn't his to carry. They moved toward their gate, the wheelchair squeaking faintly with each turn. Behind them, the officers resumed their conversation, laughter fading into the hum of the terminal. Avery clenched her fists. Her father had faced gunfire and loss beyond comprehension. And now, this. She didn't know it yet, but someone else had been watching. And soon, those two officers would regret every word they spoke. The wheelchair barely made it a few feet before the smirking officer stepped into their path again. "Hold up," he said, voice louder now, theatrical. "Need to verify some ID. Can't have folks skipping lines just because they limp a little." Avery blinked. "We've already checked in. We have boarding passes." He didn't budge. "Still need to verify. TSA policy." "Since when?" Avery snapped, hand going instinctively to her phone. The second officer stepped in beside the first, now clearly enjoying himself. "Ma'am, calm down. Don't make this a scene." Eli looked down. He'd gone silent, hands gripping the armrests tightly. Avery's voice dropped to a steel edge. "Give me your names." That was the first moment the smirk faltered, just slightly. But the lead officer recovered quickly. "You don't need that." "I do," she said, "because I'm filing a complaint." "You can do that," he shrugged. "But right now, this man's going nowhere unless I verify him." Then, without waiting for consent, he reached toward Eli's chest, where a plastic sleeve with his veteran ID poked from his jacket pocket. "Don't touch him!" Avery shouted. Eli flinched. "Avery, please!" She pulled her phone from her bag and hit record. You're harassing a disabled veteran. Every second of this is going to be on record." The second officer turned instantly, eyes narrowing. "You can't record here. There's no sign that says that. Ma'am, turn it off, or you'll be escorted out." Some passengers had turned to look now. Eyes flicked toward the scene from behind phone screens and newspapers. But no one moved. No one spoke. Avery stood firm, phone raised. This is what abuse of power looks like. "You want to fly today or not?" the officer barked. A new flash of panic crossed Eli's face. He reached up and grabbed Avery's wrist. "Please, I'm tired. Let it go." Avery hesitated, anger burning in her chest like a furnace. But then she saw her father, shoulders slumped, ashen face, eyes pleading not from weakness, but weariness. "Not today," his look said. "Not here." She lowered the phone. "There we go," the officer said mockingly. "See? Cooperation." Avery stared at him, memorized his face. She didn't need a name anymore. They moved past, the wheelchair wheels rolling slowly again. Behind them, one officer muttered just loud enough, "So many wannabe war heroes these days. It's pathetic." This time, Eli didn't react. His silence was a mask, but Avery knew what it was hiding. The plane hadn't even boarded, and he already looked like he'd fought a war. She didn't know what would happen next. But what she did know, what she felt deep in her bones, was that someone had to answer for this. And by the time their plane touched down, someone would. They sat in silence as the plane leveled out above the clouds, the dull roar of the engines filling the space between them. Avery stared out the window, but her eyes weren't tracking anything real. Her mind had already drifted. Backwards. Eli Ross hadn't always been like this. Once, he was fire. A walking wall of resolve, laughter that could echo down corridors, boots planted firmly in conviction. But that man had died overseas. Only, no one had buried him. Afghanistan, 2012. Eli's unit was on routine patrol near the Kandahar province when the convoy hit a roadside IED. 2 Humvees destroyed, 7 men lost. Eli had survived. Barely. Shrapnel tore through his leg, but what it shattered deeper inside never healed. His brothers were gone. He came back limping, not just in body but in soul. He stopped talking about it after the first few months home. The VA visits turned into silences. His medals stayed in a drawer. He hated when people thanked him for his service. It felt like being congratulated for being alive when better men were not. Avery was 16 when the panic attacks began. Once, she found him on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m., gasping, shaking, unable to distinguish dream from reality. She held his hand for hours that night, without saying a word. He never spoke of it the next morning. Crowds made him sweat. Fireworks made him flinch. Airports were hell. So when he said he wanted to fly to Denver, she was stunned. It was for Marcus Clay, his closest friend from the unit. Marcus had made it back too, but barely. Cancer, linked to burn pit exposure, took him in his sleep. Eli hadn't cried at the news. He just nodded, left the room, and came back 20 minutes later with his flight booked. "This one," he said simply. "I have to see off." And now, after everything, 2 strangers in TSA uniforms had turned that sacred effort into humiliation. Avery looked over at him now. He stared blankly at the tray table, eyes unfocused. A man alive, but not living. She remembered something Marcus once said to her when he visited years ago. "Your dad. He walks like a ghost, not because he's broken, but because he's carrying the weight of others." And they had mocked him, not knowing what he'd endured, not knowing what it took for him just to walk through that airport, to sit in that chair, to breathe. Her hand reached over and rested gently on his. He didn't look at her, but he didn't move it either. She turned back to the window, jaw clenched. They didn't just mock a man. They mocked a graveyard of memory and sacrifice. And someone was going to remember that. The air in the terminal had grown stiff, thick with unspoken judgment and tension. Avery could feel it pressing against her lungs as the silence hung like fog over the row of boarding gates. Her fingers still trembled from the confrontation. Her camera app now closed, her words left echoing in a vacuum of indifference. Then came the sound of measured footsteps, slow, deliberate, but weighted with command. A man approached from beyond the security checkpoint, plain clothes, tall, carrying age-like armor. His overcoat was pressed, civilian yet unmistakably military in posture. No one had noticed him until he stopped a few feet away, folding his hands behind his back, like a man used to speaking from podiums or battlefields. "I saw everything," the man said evenly, addressing no one in particular, and yet commanding everyone. The two officers shifted. One scoffed under his breath. "You a lawyer or something?" The man said nothing. He reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and retrieved a black leather wallet, its edge worn from decades of use. With the precision of someone who had done this countless times, he opened it and revealed a gold Department of Defense ID card with 4 stars etched cleanly into the upper right corner. There was an audible shift in the atmosphere. Even the passengers who had been pretending not to watch now leaned forward. The officer who had just spoken froze, blinking. "Sir, General—" "Retired," the man corrected. "General Jonathan Merrick, United States Army." He turned his gaze toward Avery, then to Eli, still seated, eyes cast downward. Then back to the officers. "Do you know who this man is?" General Merrick asked, voice low and deliberate. Neither answered. "He is Staff Sergeant Eli Ross. He held his position for nearly 8 hours, while under sustained mortar fire in Panjwai. His actions saved 19 lives, including my own nephew." The words landed with surgical precision. One officer opened his mouth, but the general cut him off with nothing but a look. "I've reviewed enough of your behavior to report a dozen violations. Threatening a civilian with removal for documenting public conduct? Forcibly handling identification without probable cause? Mocking a disabled veteran within earshot of witnesses?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This is no longer a security incident. It is a federal matter." The second officer, younger, paled visibly. "I suggest you return to your post," General Merrick said quietly, "and begin praying the security footage aligns in your favor." A pause. No one moved. "Now." The officers turned like schoolchildren caught cheating on an exam and retreated without a word. Avery exhaled, but barely. The general stepped forward and knelt beside Eli. "You're not alone, son," he said. Eli finally looked up. Their eyes met, one soldier to another, and something passed between them that Avery couldn't decode, but she felt it in her bones. General Merrick stood, nodded once at Avery, and turned to leave. But this wasn't over, because someone else had been watching, and recording too. The quiet after the confrontation felt louder than the chaos before it. Eli sat motionless, shoulders hunched, eyes distant, as if he were back somewhere far from the terminal, maybe in the desert, maybe inside his own mind. Avery hovered beside him, her hand resting on his, unsure whether to speak or simply sit in silence. General Merrick hadn't moved far. He stood with his arms crossed, facing the officers, now stiff with discomfort. "You will address him properly," the general said flatly. "His name is Staff Sergeant Eli Ross. He earned that title with blood, loss, and duty you'll likely never understand." The older officer's jaw worked, but his words stuck somewhere behind pride and shame. The younger one swallowed hard. We apologize, Staff Sergeant Ross," the younger officer said first, voice faltering. Eli didn't respond. He stared at the floor, numb. The older one followed, voice like sandpaper. "Apologies, Sergeant." The words felt more forced than sincere, but they were spoken, and that mattered. General Merrick turned to the watching crowd. His voice rose just enough to carry. "Let this be a reminder. A uniform isn't the only proof of service. Some of our heroes carry their wounds invisibly, but they carry them all the same." And then it happened. A rustle of movement, a shuffling of bags and phones. A woman in a blue blazer stood first, clapping once, then again. Slowly, others joined her. One by one, people stood. Passengers who had been silent minutes ago now applauded. Some even saluted. Eli looked up, stunned. Avery stood too, her eyes wet, clapping with everything she had. Tears welled in Eli's eyes but didn't fall. He nodded once, a quiet, restrained thank you to no one and everyone. The gate agent appeared at the edge of the crowd and gently approached. "Sergeant Ross, we're ready to pre-board you now." General Merrick extended a hand to Eli. "Let me walk with you." Eli hesitated, then accepted. With Avery close behind, the three moved toward the gate, the crowd parting like water. They walked slowly, the limp in Eli's leg pronounced but dignified now. Not hidden. Not mocked. Seen. As they neared the gate doors, Eli looked sideways at the general. "You said your nephew?" "Captain Aaron Merrick. You carried him 3 kilometers with shrapnel in your back," the general said. "He told me about you before he died in Germany. I've followed your life ever since. I just never found the right moment." Eli's throat tightened. "Why now?" "Because you needed reminding," the general said, voice quiet, "that your legacy still matters." Behind them, Avery listened, and she knew this wasn't just about a confrontation, or even about justice. It was about resurrection, about memory, about refusing to let a good man be forgotten. She glanced back at the terminal one last time. The officers were gone, but someone else was watching. A young man in a dark hoodie, phone still recording, eyes unreadable. And he wasn't clapping. By the time Avery and Eli touched down 2 days later, the video had racked up nearly 6 million views. A shaky, 2-minute clip shot by the young man in the hoodie, the one who hadn't clapped, captured the moment General Merrick had stepped in. The internet loved the drama, the reversal, the uniformed justice. Headlines screamed, "General silences airport officers in viral showdown," and "Veteran humiliated until this happened." A few even got Eli's name right. Fewer got his story. Avery sat cross-legged on her couch back home, eyes red from travel and tears, watching another shallow recap roll across the screen. Stock footage of planes, pixelated zoom-ins of the officers' faces, slowed-down applause with dramatic music swelling in the background. Nowhere in the clip was the sound of Eli's breath shaking, or the moment his shoulders collapsed when no one stood up for him, or the hesitation in Avery's voice when she'd begged for decency. The video told the story the world wanted. Satisfying, neat, cinematic. But it wasn't true. In the days after their return, Eli withdrew. Not into anger, into silence. He'd sit on the back porch for hours, staring at the horizon, as if listening for a sound only he could hear. Avery knew it wasn't over for him. This wasn't justice, not really. This wasn't closure. This was exposure, and exposure didn't heal. It just exhausted. One night, after a long pause over dinner, she asked, "Did it help at all?" "What he did?" "The general." Eli took a slow breath. "It helped you." And that was all he said. Avery realized he hadn't needed saving. Not like that. He needed to be seen, but not turned into a symbol. She needed to do more than repost a viral video. So she wrote, not a tweet, not a thread, but a story. What the camera didn't show, the true cost of mocking a soldier. She wrote for the Veterans Memory Journal, a quiet online publication where real stories went to breathe. No hashtags, no monetized clips, just truth. She wrote about her father limping into a gas station at midnight to avoid crowds. She wrote about how he used to stare at the ceiling fan for hours, eyes unblinking, reliving nights no one else remembered. She wrote about how he once apologized to a spider for killing it, because it was the first thing to move in silence. She told the story of the airport, yes, but also the decades that led there. And she ended the piece with this line, "My father never asked to be thanked. He asked to be left whole. And when that failed, he asked to be left alone. But I won't let his story go unheard. Not again." A week after publishing it, she received an envelope. No name on the return address. Inside was a small note card, thick stock, formal ink. "Your father did more than serve. He endured. Thank you for giving that its place in history." It was unsigned, but she recognized the handwriting. It was the general's. He hadn't appeared in any follow-up stories. No interviews, no statements. He'd simply disappeared, the way some men do when they've said all they needed to. Eli never asked about the article, but one morning she found a printed copy folded in his jacket pocket, creased at the line she'd quoted him. They didn't speak about it. But when Avery passed him his coffee that day, Eli met her eyes, and for the first time in years, he smiled. A small smile, quiet, but real.